Hello, good afternoon, everyone. I see some attendees are starting to roll in. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're going to take just a few minutes and let a few more folks get settled and ready to go. But again, thank you so much for joining us on this webinar today. A quick reminder, if you have any questions, you are welcome to put those into the chat or into the Q&A. We'll be monitoring both. So again, let's take about 2 minutes to let everybody get in and get settled, and we'll go ahead and get started. All right, for those of you just joining us, we're going to wait about 1 more minute, just to let a few more folks join in. But again, thank you so much for joining. If you have any questions, feel free to put them into the chat or the Q&A. We'll get started here in just another minute. All right. Let's get going. So again, welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's Oculus IT Executive Roundtable. I'm Dana Delappy. I'm the Vice President of Marketing here at Oculus IT, and I am thrilled to be sharing this roundtable with you all and to be speaking with some of our guests that we have today. For those of you who are maybe just becoming acquainted with Oculus IT, we're a higher education technologies partner. We're focused exclusively on helping colleges and universities operate in a more secure, efficient, and confident manner. Our work spans between managed IT services, ERP and SIS, application support, cloud and infrastructure, cybersecurity and compliance, analytics and reporting, and strategic leadership services. And really, what makes us distinct is our higher ed only focus and the 24/7, 365 global operations model, along with our security led approach. So I'm excited to, again, be sharing this roundtable with you. The focus of this session is one of the most critical inflection points that is facing campus leadership today, and that's cloud migration and moving from on-prem to SaaS. So in today's discussion, it's really valuable for us to talk about because our panel is going to bring together leaders who haven't just advised institutions from the sidelines, but they're actively sitting in the seats that you're maybe in right now, thinking about how do I move from my on-prem systems to something more scalable, secure, and SaaS ready. So with that, I do want to introduce our panel this afternoon, excuse me. So if we could move to the next slide. I'm thrilled to have with us Sam Mukherjee, who's our Director of Managed Enterprise Applications here at Oculus IT. And he has over 16 years of experience helping schools and transform their operations. He specifically specializes in modernizing legacy infrastructures. We also have with us Tom Danford, who's our Vice President of US Delivery here at Oculus IT. And he's been in higher education for more than 25 years, looking at some of the most complex institutional environments across the country. He previously served as the Vice Chancellor for IT and the CIO at North Dakota University System and the CIO at the Tennessee Board of Regents. And lastly, but not leastly, I'm super thrilled to have our special guest of the day, Jacques Laflamme, who is the Chief Information Officer at New England Institute of Technology. Since 2014, Jacques has led the institutional IT strategy, cybersecurity, and the SaaS migrations at NEIT. And he's been a valued partner with OculusIT as well. So together, this panel is going to bring some that combination of hands-on technical execution, institutional leadership, and governance expertise. And we're excited to share some of that with you today. And since our format is Q&A, I think we're going to stop sharing our screen. Perfect. This is what I love. So we can see everyone and much more engaging now. So I want to thank the three of you for your time today and let us dive right in. Before I ask my first question, one more shout out to the attendees. If you have any questions, feel free to put them into the chat and the Q&A. We will have plenty of time to address those and would love to hear your thoughts and questions. So let's get started. Tom, I'd love to start with you. If you could share a bit about, why this shift from on-prem to cloud and SaaS is no longer optional for many institutions.
Sure, Dana. Thank you very much for that introduction. Really appreciate it. And so to answer your question, in addition to the institutions that you mentioned, I had also worked for two companies that implemented SaaS. And the truth is that the business model for SaaS is much more profitable. Boy, much more profitable than the old on-prem method. And the companies that are providing SaaS are moving towards that way. And they're only developing for SaaS where they're just maintaining their existing systems, which ends up meaning that any kind of new software development, such as AI capabilities for student retention and what have you, is only going to be in their SaaS models and not on their on-prem models. So people are going to be moving to that because of the new capabilities. And then I think eventually we get to the position where the companies start retiring their on-prem systems because they become just too expensive to maintain long-term.
Great. Thank you, Tom. And I think, I'd love to ask too, when institutions start evaluating this shift, what do you think they typically get wrong early on?
Well, there's really a number of things they typically get wrong. One thing I've seen a lot is they try to duplicate the old system in the SaaS system. And the thing about SaaS systems is that you can only configure them. You cannot modify them. So what happens is that in many cases they get frustrated because they're not able to do it the way that they used to do it, and so they say that the system doesn't work. It doesn't do what it's supposed to do, and there's a lot of issues going back and forth about how we made the wrong decision and what have you. And it really comes down to they have to really change the business processes and the way that they approach the business. And so that's probably the biggest thing I've seen. And I would ask Sam if he's got any thoughts on that as well.
Yes, thank you, Tom. Yeah, I completely agree with you because that is something which any SaaS product looks up to for institutions. So it's not about there's a general conflict which goes on between IT and the change leadership team because IT would always want to have the legacy and would always want to have the original customizations intact and the processes intact. And whereas change leadership always wants to have the new IT program as a transformational program. So that conflict always remains. So if you're out and above that situation, SaaS is the best way.
And do you think I totally agree, and I know that's what we're all here to really talk about is some of those like what it takes to get there. So when you think about this, like is there a place where it does become more complex than they may have expected as you're, trying to transition to get yourself ready for SaaS? Is it governance, alignment, timelines, change management, all of the above? Curious where you would go with that, Sam.
Yeah, it's a good question, Dana. And when I talk about at an institutional leadership level, any ERP says modernization initiative succeeds or struggle far less on the technology side and far more on the governance, alignment, and change leadership. So that's what I was referring to as in change leadership when I was talking about change leadership part. Institutions that succeed typically treat these initiatives majorly as an IT project. It's not an IT project, it's an institutional transformation project and program. So leadership alignment is very critical over here because leadership alignment, if it's not there, then it's very difficult to do a cross dimensional academic, administrative, finance, enrollment. All these teams needs to be correlated and they have to work in conjunction with each other. Then only this program gets a success. Success will also need also will entail clear execution sponsorships. If you have the governance in place, then you have the strong governance and decision-making structure already leveled over here. So that makes the process and program smoother. And also, if you finally, the longer the institution waits, the more complex and more expensive the migration becomes. Why? Because due to the overgrowing customizations, due to the overgrowing integrations and dependencies, it's more difficult and complex the program becomes. So a major shift that needs to be done is in the timing. Many institutions wait until their environment becomes operationally strained or resource constrained or vendor driven, which would force generally a reactive decision under pressure. So it's high time institutions leadership meets and decides when to do the decision, because any delay in this decision actually impacts on a lot of things. It impacts on the talent risk because there are very less people who are actually supporting the organization and institutions. It also has a very system. When I talk about the system, many institutions take that their system is stable, but it's actually not. There are a lot of IT ownership that goes behind that. They have to plan a lot of patches, a lot of upgrades, a lot of integrations, instead of focusing or driving the innovation and improving the student exposure and experience.
Thanks, Sam. You know what? I love the way you're talking about this has institutional wide impact, right? So it has to be an institutional change program. I love the way you framed that up, and I actually think I'd love to pass over to Jacques to share a bit about as you were coming into this change that you were making at NEIT, how you thought about those pieces of not just, I have discrete technical things that I need to do, but what's the institutional impact? So I'd love if we could start, if you could share just a bit of your journey and some of the things that you thought of right off the bat as you were making your swap.
Yeah, sure. Thanks again, Dana, for the introduction. I appreciate it. So I'm going to take you back a little bit. And so three things happened. I had gotten multiple proposals from Aleutian for SaaS migration, and they were all barriers to entry. Basically, just the content and the cost were barriers to entry. And because I think when Aleutian tees up these proposals for migration to SaaS, I think they're really geared towards larger institutions. So we kind of struggled with smaller institutions because all of their proposals kind of make the pitch or make the assumption that you're going to be eliminating staff. For instance, Oracle DBAs. You're going to make room for this additional operational spend by eliminating roles. Well, we're a small organization. We've got a very lean, nimble IT organization, and everybody wears multiple hats. So I don't have that luxury of saying, "Oh yeah, we're going to eliminate these roles and move to SaaS." That wasn't in the cards for us. So every one of their proposals were non-starters, and it was kind of frustrating. But I do know a number of schools our size, have experienced the same thing. But a couple other things. One more was just the Broadcom announcement that they were purchasing VMware, and some folks on the call may be saying, "Why? What kind of impact did that have?" Well, the cost of we may be a small school with a small sort of VM footprint, but we had a very large VDI, so a virtual desktop deployment, and our licensing was going to go through the roof. So we started to think, all right, well, we need to move just not our student information system, but we need to think about an overall cloud plan or a cloud strategy. And then fast forward to the fall of 2024, I had a serendipitous attrition movement in my staff where I lost my subject matter expert for Banner. So all of those things kind of came to a perfect storm, created a perfect storm scenario. So, just a little bit of history. We moved to on-prem managed services with Oculus, basically a complete reaction to that losing a key staff member on the team in the spring of 2024. And then, we kind of liked it so much that we decided to move our infrastructure to the Oracle Cloud with Oculus. And we kind of went live on or around January 1st of this year. So for us, it came down to things like growth, complexity, and the need for stronger Banner operational support. I had mentioned we lost staff. So everything seemed to have gotten bigger and more complex all at the same time. Security, cloud systems, user expectations, and then staffing and budgets certainly got tighter. So I realized that continuing to do everything internally, exactly the way we had kind of always done it, it wasn't sustainable. So we went from, we started asking ourselves these questions: can we do it ourselves, or where does it make sense for us to partner with somebody so our internal teams can stay focused on kind of those high value things?
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Jacques, for sharing that overview and sharing where you stood, as you were making this evaluation. I want to ask, because you shared, from your story, you knew you had to make a change and you knew you needed a partner, but I'm curious if you could share, did you have any concerns? Did you see some of the risks that you thought you were going to have to work with making this switch and even finding the right partner? And can you share some of your experience there?
Yeah, sure. I was scared right out the gate. This was a huge lift. There's an embedded culture here in how we do things. So I was suggesting we do something drastically different here. So honestly, the impact on our user community and my own IT department, our loss of control were probably the two biggest things. The impact of the user community, because we're going to be asking them to do things vastly different, and then just the impact of my own internal IT department. Our priorities were going to shift significantly. So, when we're responsible, all the CIOs on this call in higher ed, when we're responsible for IT security operations, the user experience, and handing over pieces of that to a third party requires a lot of trust. We're always concerned about responsiveness, accountability. I mentioned institutional culture, and then communications, and finally, whether the partner truly understands higher ed. We're fortunate there because I think most of Oculus's IT client base is higher education. So I guess, in summary, I was also very concerned about making sure this stayed a partnership, not just a vendor relationship, frequent cadence of communications, et cetera. I didn't want our IT staff or our user community to feel like the decisions, I made or we made here in IT were happening to them, but rather with them. I think Sam touched on that a little bit, making it a bit more of an institutional project as opposed to an IT sort of effort. And
yeah, thank you, Jacques.
I agree, Dana. Yes, I'll just take a minute over here. I would suggest what I say is when I was working closely with NEIT, what I found, which I mentioned in my last question, is alignment is very important. And the governance is very important. If you have a smooth governance structure and the alignment is there within the team, across the team, it's very important, and it makes your project 50% easier than how it seems like.
Sure. Thanks for that, Sam.
Welcome.
Thank you both. Before I move to the next question, we do have a question for you, Jacques. If you asking about if you moved to Oracle Cloud and Oculus Managed Services, what SaaS ERP system did you move to Oracle?
Oh, yeah, thanks. I probably should have led with that. Banner. So we're a banner shop.
Great. Let's see. You may have touched on this a little bit, but I'm curious, Jacques, in your transformation journey, you had to highlight the biggest challenge you had, and how you navigated it. I think we're going to continue to hear a lot more about the organizational transformation, but are there any other big challenges you had that you could share some insights on how you navigated those?
Yeah, sure. So let me start by saying that we simultaneously transitioned Banner to OCI, and updated 10 Banner self-service modules from SSB 8 to SSB 9. So for simplicity's sake, I had communicated to the user community back at the beginning of 2025 that we were simply undergoing an aggressive systems transition. So we just called it the aggressive systems transition project. That's it, So everybody around campus knew it as that, not the Banner migration to the cloud or anything. So I did that by communicating to stakeholders, explaining to them that what basically defining what technical debt is and how dependent our user community was on aging and legacy systems. And I was very forthcoming in that message that we were going to break things. So I guess the most difficult moment during this journey was probably the transition period itself, where the old operational habits and the new operational models, collided during and after the migration. There's always a point in these projects where people are sort of unsure of themselves. Who owns what? How do escalations work? How are escalations going to work? Whether the service levels will hold, and whether the change was the right decision or not. So, and that uncertainty certainly created anxiety for our community. The way we navigated it was that through, constant communication, transparency in those communications, and relationship mending. Because we did break things, and like I said, I told them ahead of time, we're going to break some eggs in this, and we did. So we had to keep reinforcing that this was not about replacing, institutional knowledge. It was more about adding to our IT department's bench and making sure our team was more durable for other things. So the human side of change management mattered just as much as the technical side. I guess that's the simplest way of explaining, what the most difficult part was that human side.
Absolutely. And Jacques, you and I have talked about this too. Like it is not an easy feat to implement, change, migrate, transition or any technology, whether it's new or legacy that you're introducing. But I love the way you talk about the relationship mending, because this, at the end of the day, this continued to be a partnership and a relationship between OculusIT and the institution, and you as a leader of the institution, and your staff and your community. So thank you for sharing those.
Hey, I noticed that Trevor Seifert just asked a question. I can answer that one if you want me to.
Yes, please.
So that's a great question. So in the eyes of our user community, we really are on SaaS right now. But I know, and as you folks on this call probably understand, it's still managed services, but it's hosted in Oracle's cloud. But that's transparent to our user community, because we do still have a handful of modifications in our Banner environment. So we can't go to true SaaS until we eliminate those modifications. That being said, without this partnership, we wouldn't be able to aggressively eliminate those modifications. So that's our next journey. Now that we're in the cloud, our next step will be getting something, at least from an IT perspective, that resembles true SaaS. But like I said, I explain it to my user community as SaaS right now.
Wonderful. Um, Tom, I'd like to shift back to you a little bit and understand a bit more of like, as we talk about just some of the trends that are happening in higher education and specifically some of, as Jacques just shared, this is sort of a stopover. But you've got to limit those modifications. Can you share a bit more about, where else you think at the leadership level you can help some of these institutions succeed?
Well, one thing that discovered was that if you ever seen that sort of bell curve where they talk about the adoption, the life cycle adoption of software, where you begin with the innovators and then there's the early adopters, and then you go to the early majority, then the late majority, and then finally to the laggards. The longer you wait in that process and you get to the early majority, let's say, and then go into the late majority, the costs go up because as you adopt early, the vendors are going to give you much favorable pricing because they want to get their user base up as quickly as they possibly can. So you get better pricing. You also, depending upon the system you have, how old the system is, like say take a system like PeopleSoft, you're going to have the ability to get more people for backfill the earlier that you adopt because there'll be folks available. But when more people are doing their implementation, backfill is going to be much more difficult to find, at least good backfill, let's put it that way. And then as you get on the other side of the bell curve where you're looking in the late majority, it's going to become really difficult to find really good implementation partners. So you got to find that, and also the cost of the software will go up because the user base will be much larger and they'll be able to charge more, if you will. So there's a sweet spot that you as a leadership at your organization has to decide where exactly do you want to be in that bell curve of implementation, recognizing that not only the financial resources, but the actual knowledge base of people out there is going to either increase or decrease depending upon when you decide to go to that SaaS environment.
Thanks, Tom. And you actually tapped into a question that I was going to ask a little bit, which is around if institutions that are on the fence, what should they start doing now? So like as you talk about that bell curve, you talk about some of the risks of waiting too long. But what would you, and I want to open this up to everyone, what would you, on the panel, what would you say are things that institutions who are still on the fence should start doing now as they're thinking about their legacy on-prem, and SaaS becoming sort of the future for all technologies?
Well, I'll start off the conversation. I mean, the first thing is to really make sure that you have a really good inventory of all the modifications that you may have made to that software. That includes the bolt-ons as well as the actual modifications that you may have made to the actual source itself. And then, once with an inventory of it, you want to start deciding which ones that you can do without. Many times because you may have a third-party software that is doing some of that functionality now as opposed to reinventing it all the way, and then also understanding all the interfaces that you have that need to be addressed as well, because it's not just the ERP system where you've got the student information system and the HR payroll system and the finance and all that other kind of stuff. It's the third-party things that get interfaced to it that add the additional functionality that doesn't come with the original ERP system, such as financial aid components, customer relationship components, housing systems, and the like. So those are all things that you can begin the process that you can then put together a pretty decent picture as to what exactly you need to take care of to go to SaaS with again the goal of trying to get back to baseline, especially if you're thinking of going and using the system that the SaaS system that you're presently the on-prem system that you're presently using and going to its SaaS component. The more you can reduce the customizations, the better off you are. And going to an entirely different one, I don't know how much that really depends upon reducing it, but it certainly is important for being able to put the planning together to know what you want to be able to configure in the new system.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with respect to the third-party integrations. If there was something I would have done differently, going back to the beginning of this, was a more accurate inventory of those third-party integrations, and then a good technical understanding of how those third-party integrations function from a security perspective. But one thing I want to chime in on that same question is a value proposition. If you remember how I kind of started off, I mentioned we had this perfect storm of things. If it weren't for Broadcom truly purchasing VMware, I don't think I could have gone down this path or been as effective, because there was no real cost savings with moving to the Oracle Cloud. That being said, there was significant amount of cost avoidance because I was able to package it up in an overall multi-year strategy. So no more hardware maintenance for our data centers. We've completely emptied our data center. Everything's in some cloud solution right now. So it was that overarching sort of value proposition. If we do this, yeah, we don't need to replace that void I have now with banner specific skills on my team. I don't need to replace that because we have a deep bench there. But we also had that significant cost avoidance. So there's so many more bottom line items now, and so few capital recurring investments because of this. So I would say, including this in other more long-term planning with the institution, that this, and I'll always echo what Sam said, this is an institutional project. It's not an IT project.
I 100% agree with both Jacques and Tom. And I can just say two things. One is, it reminds me of one phrase, which is going back to your basics. That is important, because if you talk about going to SaaS or going to cloud, it's always good to be at your basics. So start trying to, check which are localizations or customizations you have, so that you can go rid of those items and go back to your basics. And the last one, which I would like to understand and say, is it's the right time to do an assessment of your ERP and your ERP ecosystems, because once you start doing them, you will be able to understand more about all the localizations, all the customizations, all the integrations, how they have been done, whether you can modify or modernize those. So everything will come up once you start doing an in-depth assessment of your ERP ecosystem. That's important.
Thank you all. That's great. I love the idea of going back to basics, and bringing that in, because it ties into, an evaluation of all of your customizations, all your bolt-ons, right? Like, there are things that we maybe did a few years ago, and now we need to reevaluate why we did them, and is there a better way? There's also a change in our thinking throughout this.
Exactly.
So let's see, I think I have about 2 questions left for the group, but I do want to give another shout out to our attendees. Thank you for the great questions that have come in thus far. And if you do have any additional questions, we do have probably about another 10 or 15 minutes left, so we can absolutely take those questions. Please feel free to put them into the chat. But I want to ask, I'll start with Sam with this one is for you. Do you think this journey differs based on institution size, current setup, complexity? Can you share a bit of some insights there? We've heard Jacques' story, but how do you think that this might differ on the journey for other institutions?
It's a great question, Dhanam. And I would definitely love to provide more insights on this, because the journey differs significantly when you talk about size, complexity, or the current setup, because it all revolves around the number of integrations and customizations you have, how many multi-campus or distributed operations you have in and around, what are the internal IT maturity, and what is the current staffing that you have, because staffing is also getting very critical nowadays. It's very difficult. Trust me, it's very difficult to get resources on Genzabar and Colleague. It's very, very difficult. And when you know that you have people, only few people whom you depend on for your entire university's ERP system, it becomes critical by itself. And when you talk about the data quality, governance, cloud adaptation, these all matters when you talk about institutional size. So a project, a program, this institutional program varies depending on how big the institution is, how multiple integrations you have, how many multiple integrations are, how many multiple campuses you have. So if I talk about NEIT, we are under pressure to get this project done in 50 days. But again, all thanks goes to NEIT team and Jacques, because he had a wonderful team who were supporting us throughout the program. There are multiple institutions where we have worked with, and it went for 6 months also. Like if I give an example of City College of San Francisco, we migrated 6 environments into Oracle Cloud, and it went for 6 months. But we moved all of their customizations and integrations as is from on-prem to cloud. So it depends on the institution size and complexity.
And I would assume too, like, there's pros and cons to both of those options, right? To
Yep.
minimize your customizations as you move in, to just lift and shift, if you will. But again, the complexity, you mentioned the multiple campuses, definitely things for everyone to keep in mind as they.
And at the same time, you also need to have your functional team back you, because you need to have your user group, testing group available from the institutions. You need to have your functional team members who need to go through the system, give a sign off. Everything depends. So it's all a collaborative effort that needs to happen if you are going to have this program successfully done.
And I'd just add to that I had a boss once who said that there's no interest like self-interest. And so the larger the organization, the more self-interests there are out there. And so it can become a real big governance issue as well.
Jacques, Sam mentioned, the push. We did this transition in 45, 50 days, and some of the things that you did along the way, as you think about, the complexity, can you share, was there anything you would have done differently? Did you feel like making some of those adjustments and keeping some of them along the way, were anything you would have done differently there?
Yeah, timing. We did user acceptance testing during the Christmas, the holiday break. So, and we had several iterations of user acceptance testing for PPRD test and then finally production. So I would probably not have done. We did what we call, I guess, a sprint in this. But if we didn't do it in that window this past holiday season, it would have gotten punted all the way to this summer. And there was some urgency to get this done. So I would suggest maybe doing a little bit more planning so that doesn't happen. Yeah, we asked for this to be done in 50 days. We did pull it off. And maybe it would have gone a little smoother with the user community had we not decided to, do it during the holiday break.
I sometimes feel that time is not always on our side. The best laid plans for timing, can always come back. But that's great advice. And I think just to think about that, what's going on in your institution, where are their holidays, where are their vacations, and who you need to leverage and when.
Yeah, but I would say I think Tom talked about this, was that the third party integrations. I think technically speaking, third party integrations were probably were harder than we thought. So I would strongly suggest that folks document but as a whole, I think aligning the expectations with defining operational boundaries was also harder than expected. It looked real clear. Our environments are, all of us, our environments are complicated, fast moving. They're dependent on heavily on the people, right? That human element. And we discovered right out the gate that our success was going to depend on ground rules and rules of engagement, governance, transparency, frequent communications, clear escalation paths. If I could have done something differently, I probably would have spent even more time up front. So going back a year before we started, documenting expectations, defining metrics or deliverables specifically, clarifying escalation models. But the most important lesson learned by me especially was that I could have done a much better job socializing with greater detail the change internally before things began, and then emphasizing it as more of an institutional project and not an IT project. But I do want to emphasize one more thing here. This isn't a set it and forget it kind of exercise. This partnership is going to need constant care and feeding, engagement, and continuous refinement. It'll always be a work in progress.
Wonderful. Thank you. So I don't see any additional questions from our attendees. But please put them in. We do still have more time. But my final question is really the easy layup to you all. Is there anything that we haven't discussed? Any question that I haven't asked you and you are just dying to share a bit of insight? So I'd love to give you all that opportunity that if there's, again, one piece of advice or one additional landmine that you need to be watching out for that we haven't discussed for thus far, if you want to share that with our audience.
I would say, regardless of how hard you try to find every one of those skeletons in the closet, some legacy app that somebody depends on the third Tuesday of every September, you're not going to find it. There's going to be something months after the migration that, oh, we didn't know that still existed. There's going to be gotchas, especially, we've rolled out Banner here, long before I got here. I think in 1993, Banner was rolled out here.
Mhm.
So there's always going to be something hidden in a closet. So, a little bit more due diligence up front and trying to, look under every stone. It's difficult, but there will be. And if you're communicating to whether it be the board of trustees, executive committee, or even, staff and faculty, admin staff and faculty, I would definitely state that, you're going to break something.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that goes into the attitude in which you go into the project. You got to go into the project knowing that stuff is going to go wrong and that you're just going to have to work it through. And it's important to have a sense of humor, because if you don't have a sense of humor, you're just going to go crazy.
Yeah. Yeah, somebody
Apart
famous
from
said the worst case scenario should never be a surprise.
yes,
Yeah.
and to second that, Jacques, I would say, like, irrespective of whether any institution is going for cloud or SaaS, eSaaS or anywhere, they should have a plan to also have a disaster recovery environment. Because in most of the on-prem institutions, what we have seen is they do not have a disaster recovery. And when I talk about disaster recovery, it's not that entire setup is required. You can always have a standalone standby database server of your banner end or your Yapi or anything that is there with the real-time sync which happens. But it's also important to have a geo-replication of all your application servers, because that is important. If anything goes wrong, God forbid, you at least have the application servers backup and the database backup to spin up a system in 4 or 5 hours at the max. That's important. Irrespective of you are going to cloud or SaaS, this is the most important thing.
As I hear and as I think of everything that I've heard today, I boil it up to kind of three things to think about. Like, you have to have some humility, that sense of humor, of understanding that you can't do it all and we're on a journey together. which leads into that it's a partnership, right? You have to have backup plans. You have to focus as a team and really get that through. And then, the change management, the institutional change management, that patience and openness to change, is really what's rung through for me as I've listened to you all kind of share, what this journey looks like. But with that said, I want to thank the three of you so much for sharing your insights, for joining us today. I want to thank our attendees for joining us, and for the wonderful questions that have come through. We will be sending out a follow-up to this, both the recorded video as well as a key takeaways recap on our blog. We hope to see you again in next month for one of our next webinars. But again, thank you, Jacques, for joining us, Sam and Tom as well for your insights. And I hope everyone has a wonderful rest of the day.
Thanks for the invitation.
Thank you, everyone.